evening, everybody, and welcome to Stamola Live. We are absolutely thrilled to be starting off the year 2022 with an event this evening that will celebrate language and poets and novelists in why and how we write novels in verse. So before we get started, I want to encourage you, if you have not yet already, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I have never said this before, I don't think, at a small live event, but this is a new year and I'm just gonna go for it. The more subscribers we have, apparently, the more we can do on YouTube. And the more people will see these videos, and we all know that these videos are chock full of amazing information for everybody. So if you haven't already, we would really appreciate it. I am Erica Rand Silverman, and I am a literary agent at Stamola Literary Studio, and we create these events to be able to create community in the literary industry, to share what we know, to inspire you and to feel inspired, and to share the amazing books that our clients are writing. This evening, I will not be your moderator. I have a very special moderator for you. Her name is Stacey Barney. She has worked in publishing for 20 or maybe over 20 years at this point. She has worked on award-winning books and has received numerous prestigious awards herself. Most recently, she was honored at the 6th Black Women in Media Awards for her work, her contribution, and demonstration of excellence in literature and publishing. Stacey is the associate publisher of Nancy Paulson Books at Penguin Random House and Imprint of Penguin, Young Readers, and we are all great admirers of her here at the studio, and I thank her incredibly for giving her evening to us tonight. Stacey will be talking with 4 poet novelists, Charles Waters, Ellen Hagan, Colby Cedar-Smith, and Irene Latham, and they will tell you more about themselves, but I will also put into the chat the link to the event page where I detail lots of information about all 4 of them with links to their websites and their books, so I encourage you to go there. First, I will bring in Stacey. Hi, Stacey.
Hi, Erica. Thank you for that very generous and kind introduction. I'm sitting here blushing a little.
I really had to narrow it down. I took out a lot. So I could have gone on, but
I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah. I don't want to embarrass you too much before you get started. So
well, I'm really glad to be here, and particularly with these 4 talented poet novelists. They all have such extraordinary work, and really using the poetic form to tell such different stories, and they all blew me away. So I'm really happy to welcome Charles Waters, Irene Latham, Ellen Hager, and Colby Cedar-Smith.
hello, everybody. I'm going to step off the screen because it'll make you all slightly bigger, even though I'll be jealous. I'll be here on the back end, everybody, working the chat and listening and learning. Thanks so much for being here.
Great. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Erica.
Okay, so I'm going to start and just ask you all to introduce yourselves, or start with Charles Waters, who's at the top of my screen. Hi, Charles. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, Stacey. I'm Charles Waters. I'm the co-author with my poetic forever friend, Irene Latham, of African Town, an historical fiction novel in verse about the last transatlantic slave trade in our nation's history. Irene and I have co-wrote other books together, and I'm proud to now be part of the Penguin Random House family with this book.
Irene?
Oh, hello, everyone, and so glad to be here with all of you. And Stacey and I have worked together for many years. My first novel was published by Stacey back in 2010, so we've had a long relationship, which is just super, it's wonderful. And of course, me and Charles, having worked together now on quite a few books, this is our third one together. I am coming to you from North Central Alabama, and this is what I call the Purple Horse Poetry Studio and Music Room. This is where I do all my creative stuff. So this is my happy place. So thank you for entering my space with me tonight.
Wonderful. Colby?
My name is Colby Cedar-Smith, and I'm a poet, novelist, as Erica introduced us. And I'm so happy to be here with everyone tonight. And I am a poet, and I started out as an adult poet, publishing poetry in magazines and publications. But this is my first book, Call Me Athena, and it's a historical YA novel in verse, and I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you all and listen to all of your stories.
Wonderful. Ellen?
Hello, it's so good to be here with you all tonight. My name is Ellen Hagan. I am a poet and novelist. This Reckless Glorious Girl, we'll be talking about this tonight, is my first middle grade novel in verse. It's about Beatrice Miller, who is figuring out how to become her true self. She grows up with her mom and her mama in small town Kentucky, Bardstown. That's also where I'm originally from. And I'm also an educator. I've been an educator in New York City in the school system here for about 20 years. And so I love the art and the young people sort of speaking to each other and using the work to sort of inform and be in conversation.
Wonderful. And you all gave a little short synopsis of what your books are about, but I'm going to ask you to return to that and just give us a little deeper dive into what your book is about. And Colby, let's start with you.
Well, this is a very personal story for me. It's based on my grandmother, Mary Scandalaris, who was the daughter of Greek and French immigrants in Detroit, Michigan in the 1930s. So the background is the story of this once booming industrial city, and it's now facing the Depression. And so we have lost jobs at the Ford factory and hunger strikes and riots. And in the book, Mary struggles to find her path, and she and her parents clash over many issues, including arranged marriage and Mary's desire to grow beyond her own culture. And the book is not only told from Mary's perspective, but it includes flashbacks to her parents' life in Greece and France in World War I. And they're all 16. It's like a snapshot of all of them at 16. So these are my great-grandparents as well. It's written from the perspective of three profoundly different narrators, but the book is really about the courage that it takes to honor heritage and tradition, but also forge a new future. And I really hope that the themes that are present in this historical novel, identity, freedom, equality, love, hope, are themes that will really resonate with readers today.
Wonderful. And I will go to Charles and Irene. And full disclosure, I did edit African Town, but I promise not to play favorites tonight. I'm interested in the juxtaposition of African Town in Colby's book because of the multiple narrator situation. Though, Colby, you've only got 3.
I know.
So that's like, that's nothing.
Not enough. Next time I'll try harder.
You've got to have 15 to beat the pros.
I love it.
Charles, Irene, why don't you tell us a little bit about African Town?
I'm going to hand this to Charles. One thing you learn in collaboration is to let your partner's strengths shine forth. And Charles is so much better at this than me. So go for it, Charles.
Thank you, Irene. In 1859, a shipping magnate in Mobile, Alabama named Timothy Mayer made a bet with some businessmen friends that for $1,000 he could go to Africa and kidnap Africans and bring them back as enslaved humans under the nose of the authorities, because at that time the international slave trade had been outlawed for over 50 years. He hired a man named William Foster, who he'd worked with before. They retrofitted a ship called the Clotilda as an enslaved ship. They went to They went to Dahomey, and which is now called Benin, and in a quid pro quo of $9,000 of goods and services, because then Africans would sell their own people for profit. They made a quid pro quo. Foster brought back over 100 Africans on American soil. They were enslaved for 5 years until this was in 1860 when they were kidnapped. The bet was made in 1859. In 1865, when they were freed, they went to Timothy Mayer and asked for reparations. He said no. They asked to go back to Africa and him pay for that. He said no. So these incredible humans worked and made enough money to buy land on his property and called it African Town, using their African customs on American soil. In that time, they built a school, a church, and a cemetery, and all those things are still around today. And some of the descendants from the Clotilda Africans still live in African Town. It's an extraordinary story that Irene and I didn't know about until 2018 at the Alabama Book Festival, when there was a talk about African Town. And it's stories like this, these hidden stories of history that need to be brought forth more in our society. And that's what the book is about. It's in 14 different voices, everyone, including that of the Clotilda, wow, who would be, I would think, what the reader would feel like in terms of seeing what's going on and wanting to do something about it and being only able to do so much. So that's the story of African Town in a nutshell.
Wonderful. And Ellen, I have to say, I love the title of your book. I feel like it needs to be on a T-shirt or something. It's like, I want it on a T-shirt for myself.
Me too.
So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your book?
Yeah, thank you. It feels, just to hear you all, and I know your all's books, it feels so lucky to be writing in the time with all of you, because for my students to get the work that you all are writing and for my children to get that, it feels very, very lucky. So thank you all. So Reckless Glorious Girl, yes, I feel like the title, I was thinking about, I'll talk just briefly about how I landed at the idea for this story. I was in a 7th grade classroom, and I teach for an organization called the Dream Yard Project. It's a social justice, arts, and education program in the Bronx. And this teaching artist was talking about Pablo Neruda's Book of Questions. And it was a 7th grade class that was all figuring out what would be the most magical and also the really simple questions that they would ask. And so they all started thinking, some of them were like, am I ever going to travel around the world? And am I ever going to get a first kiss? Like, it was these very big and very small questions. And I kept thinking about myself in 7th grade and who I was and what I needed and the kind of questions that I was returning to. So Beatrice Miller is 7th grade. She is figuring out, she's on that precipice between being a kid and figuring out how to still play pretend and use your imagination, but also having crushes and also feeling like you want to be part of the cool crowd, or what is the cool crowd and what is my existence? I think for me, Beatrice is trying to figure out how to exist in the world and how to exist in this Bardstown, Kentucky, which is a very small town in central Kentucky. So how does she stay her true self? She is growing up with her grandmother, who she calls Mama, and her mother. And her Mama is wild, is a total character, and her mom's a little more strict with her. So she's trying to navigate who to listen to, how to show up, and how to be her truest self, while also trying to be cool. I feel like it was like that kind of, it's about identity and it's about place. It's about puberty, first crushes, kisses, and it's about, friendship and enjoying and figuring out how do you enjoy and love who you are and your place in the world.
Wonderful. And Ellen, I guess I'll pick up my next question with you as well. We're all talking about tonight novels and verse. Why verse? What about the form felt right for this story?
Yeah, I think so. I started, really, my first love as a writer was poetry. I think about around 13, 14 years old, my teacher started to introduce poetry. And I remember having so much emotion and heart. There was something about poems holding holding memory and holding excitement and love and ache. You know, this idea that you can hold all these parts of yourself, and it's contained in that one space, and that there's breath and space on the page. It felt like the first form of writing that I didn't have to tell the whole story. I could tell pieces of it. I could, you know, hold back on some things, and I could reveal where I wanted to. I felt like it was, for me, the first place that my heart could exist, you know. And so that's for seventh graders. I felt like, ooh, seventh grade is where I feel like they want to say the most with the least amount of words. How do I say the most with the least? You know, how do I get all of that emotion and heart in there, but I don't have to reveal too much about myself? So I think that's where I landed for this book in particular.
Well, I love that. I have actually never thought about verse that way, and how well suited it is for that middle grade experience, but you really nailed it eloquently.
Yeah, thank you.
Colby, talk to me about why verse for Call Me Athena.
So I'm going to be very honest. I tried to write this book many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a poet, and this is how my voice expresses itself, how my spirit expresses itself. And I echo so much. I resonate so well with what you just said, Ellen, about the emotion and like the space. And I really think about poetry as, you know, paring down so much of the language to really just the bones of it. And so I think about it as bones and music in a way, that it's that, and so much of what I hear and how I write is through this like auditory experience. And I think a lot of that has to do with the line breaks and the space on the page, like you were talking about, Ellen. And that is how we invite our readers in with the music that we're creating. I think that because of my specific book, what I was doing was I was time traveling, and Allison Helligers, and who's my agent, and I laugh about this because I went from various time periods in the book and different places and these lush settings of the coast of Greece and northeastern France. And there's love, and there's food, and there's sensuality, and there's courage. And it really is these huge stories of loss and longing. And there's no better way for me to connect with, or there was no better way for me to connect with these stories of my family than to use the, like, for lack of a better word, the hallowed language of poetry. Poetry somehow isolates and distills and hits you in this like gorgeous, hard, painful, beautiful place in your body and your spirit. And that's really where this story lives for me.
Wonderful. Charles, Irene?
Well, I'll start. Charles and I never considered any other way to tell the story. We knew that it needed to be poetry. I think a big part of that, just both of you have expressed so much of my love for poetry, Ellen, just the emotion and the heart of poetry, and Colby, the music. And that just kind of makes me think about, I'm a musician, and one of the things that I'm constantly learning is about the importance of silence. And I think when you're dealing with subject matter like African Town, which is so brutal in moments and so heartrending, that you really need that white space. And so for me, I really think it was the only way to tell this story. And in addition to the fact of there being 14 voices, and had we used prose, it would have been a lot longer book and a lot more difficult to latch, to hang on to, I think. So those were reasons, giving the space on the page for the reader, and the accessibility of the voices was really made possible through the poetry.
To me, there's no genre in writing that's hit me as hard as poetry can. I, as a child, I had difficulty reading, and what I think the problem was, looking back on it, is that all those black lines on a page is intimidating to some people's eyes, at least to mine. So when I'd see a thick book, I'd go forget about it. And with poetry, with, as Irene said, all that white space on the page, and as Colby said, all that distilling, it's easier on the eyes. You can read 5 poems, and next thing you know, you're 5 pages into the book. You're already off and running. That's why I'm such a big promoter of it, because I'm looking at my younger self today almost and going, hey, check this out. You may enjoy this. And that's how I write a lot of the time, thinking about that person. I know that seems a bit weird, but that's how I operate a lot of the time. And poetry is not intimidating. Growing up, I think teachers were intimidated by it, so they didn't teach it correctly. And poetry is such a useful tool of taking any kind of subject matter, especially difficult subject matter, and make it more palatable to the reader without taking away the integrity of the story. What a time to be alive for verse novels, ladies and gentlemen.
I do have one bone to pick with you, though, because African Town is a pretty thick book. So,
yes.
Mine's
it is
575 pages, so I think.
And
Oh, he wins.
and I can tell you the ninth grade version of me would have looked at this in prose and said, forget about it. But in poetry, I would have had the ninth grade version of myself would have had a shot at reading this.
Okay, all right.
And that's why I love poetry so much. Whether it's thick, I don't know what I said. What that was. But yeah, I apologize. But yeah,
don't apologize. You said that if it was a thick book, you were out of there, and I was like, well,
yeah. When I was a kid, it was, Stacey. Now it's obviously it's not the case as a middle-aged man, but I read a lot of verse novels because even to this day, it's still easier on my eyes. Though I can read thick books of prose and enjoy them.
Okay.
I get through poetry a lot faster.
So funny. I don't know who I was talking to. Maybe it was Erica earlier, because I'm in the midst of editing another novel in verse right now. And it takes a long time to edit a novel in verse. I think it takes longer to edit a novel in verse than it does prose, actually. And I always forget that when I go into something. I was like, oh, I'm going to knock out 50 pages this morning. Nope, I'm on page 15.
I'll add something to that, Stacey. Just as writing these books, for me, the visual aesthetic is every bit as important as the language being used. So it needs to look right on the page. I'd love to hear what Ellen have to say about that.
Absolutely.
Yes. It's like Jane Yolen. Her knowledge has been in my ear for years. And she's always like, make every word count, especially for certain genres. In poetry, you make every word count. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons, besides how it looks on the page, why it may take longer for you to edit than a book of prose, Stacey.
Yeah, I think that, as you were all alluding to, poetry forces you to be still and really engage with the words and the ideas on the page in a very different way. And there's a lot more that's implicit. There's a lot of subtext in good poetry. So it's not that you're not actually only editing the words on the page, right? You're also playing more strictly with the meaning of those words. Whereas prose, you're just a little bit more freewheeling. And line editing prose actually is the easier deal, because I was like, yeah, I can just knock that whole sentence right on out. I can knock this whole paragraph out. I'm going to take this whole page and just knock it all away. Whereas you can't. The poetry is a very carefully built thing. It's what's that game? Jenga? Is it Jenga? Yeah. Where you sort of like, if you move one thing here, like you risk toppling the whole shebang. And so I don't want to, when I'm editing prose, I don't want to topple anything. So I do find myself moving through it slower and just more methodically than I do with prose. So I should put that on a t-shirt so I don't forget, because I've bought 4 verse novels in the last year. Now let's get back to talking about you all fine folks. Colby, you based your novel on your paternal grandmother's childhood. And did that make writing it easier, harder? And I wonder if there was research attached to it. Like, tell me about that whole process.
So it's a really interesting question, and it's one that I am getting a lot about this book. It's it's hard to go into someone else's life and speak as their persona. It's not easy. But what I can say is that I grew up at my grandmother's feet, and I listened to her tell these stories over and over and over again. In one interview, someone said, well, did she tell you any of these stories while she was alive? And I laughed out loud. Like, you could not get my grandmother to stop telling stories. She was just, she was lively and feisty and crazy for us. And she wanted to embed every part of her history into us. And so a lot of this is like, as soon as I found the novel in verse form, it came flooding out in this really, really satisfying way. And I think that probably Ellen and Irene and Charles can attest to this, that like when you really find the vein. I have a geologist husband, so like if you really like tap into a vein and you can like just see it for all of its glory and all of the facets of it, like it goes really quickly. That felt really nice to me. Mm-hmm. What was really hard is I knew I had to build a story that was going to be interesting to a reader, but also, and it's fiction, so, but also stay true to who my grandmother was and expectations that she may have had for her story being told. And I know what they were. So, because she was so bold with her opinions about everything. So it was almost like I was tapping into a cellular structure in my body and in my DNA to tell this. But it took tons of research. I grew up in the Midwest, but I didn't grow up in Detroit. And so my father did, and my grandmother did. So it really took, I read so many books about the Ford factory and the Ford family and Detroit and the history. And I wanted to be respectful and not shy away from any of I wanted to really give all points of view having to do with this time in history. Mm-hmm. And I also traveled to France and took my entire family to Saint-Malo and, talked to local historians, went to the convent, went to the graveyards, and through that was able to show my children the layers of the story. And we went to Detroit together, went to, if you've read the book, there's a lot of really amazing landmarks in Detroit that still exist, that are vibrant, that I wanted to showcase in the book. So, the Detroit Institute of Art and Belle Isle and all of these glorious, beautiful places that Mary as a character went and really felt grounded and inspired to become more herself because of the power of her city. So I wanted to really be very careful and very thoughtful about how to tell the story of Detroit, to inspire people to go there. It's a living city. It's a wonderful, center of arts in America today still. So, honestly, my greatest hope is that she would be super proud of it. And And that is really a question that keeps me up at night. I think she would be so admiring and loving, and she always was of me, but I want to make her proud.
I never met your grandmother, and one of my questions was, what do you think your grandmother would have thought of the book? But I think you've answered it, and I think she's super proud.
Oh, thank you. I hope so. I talk to her a lot, and she seems to be.
Let's move up to Ellen, because I also love what your novels share, sort of like this strong female centering of the book. And Ellen, I love that your book tells an intergenerational story of women. Why did you decide to anchor your novel with the relationships between Beatrice and her mother and her grandmother?
Yeah, I think for me, the relationships between the women, it had this sort of electricity that was figuring out, how do you stay connected to your mother, who you also might have some friction with, but also you have this then your her mama, who she adores. How does she sort of figure out who to listen to and who to stay true to, or how to take all of those pieces of advice? I think I was raised by a very, very strong-willed mother, and I was close. My grandparents. My grandmother is 102. My mom's mother. So my mom's always like, "You're gonna write so many big books. Hopefully we have a long line of staying, of being here." And so I'm used to so many stories passed down too. This exactly what Colby was saying. How these threads or these parts of your ancestry that are braided into your own life, how do you take some of those stories? And so for Reckless Glorious Girl, I wanted some of those stories to exist. I wanted the women to be strong-willed. I wanted them to say what was on their minds. I'm always trying to figure out how to put complicated, nuanced women on the page. Women that aren't always likable, that are sometimes more in your face than, or sometimes more quiet, that just can exist in all the ways. I feel like for this book, I wanted Beatrice to have to struggle with some things, to be wrestling with who she was, and to have models, either ones she wanted to listen to or ones she didn't. And I think the same is true. It's the mother and Mama, but it's also her best friends, Mariella and Stacey Ann, who I think it's also about the core of young women friendships. These friends are wonderful to each other. I think it's actually Beatrice who's the one that kind of makes some mistakes. But I felt like I wanted to show really strong, how do friends hold each other? How do young women and girls, what does it look like when you're holding each other up, or when you're trying to help each other to rise in the world? So, and I had a lot of models of that growing up, and I have 2 daughters, and I see their friendships. I see how they buoy each other. The good friends and good role models, your mom or your grandparents, are the ones who help to buoy you up. So I think I wanted to hold that in the book somehow.
I love that. And you've also sort of answered my next question, is what Colby and Charles and Irene's book obviously has in common is the inspiration of real life nonfiction events. And I wanted to know if there were elements of nonfiction in Reckless Glorious Girl, and clearly there are.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the one thing is, so it's based in Kentucky, which is where my dad is from, but my dad was one of 9 children. And so I had a ton of cousins. So I was close-ish to my grandparents, but not, I also, there was also a little bit of a distance because there were so many of us.
Yeah.
And my children, their relationship with my mother and my mother-in-law is very close. And my mother has no problems giving them lots of advice. So I think I definitely took some of my lived experience and put it in the book as well. And food, writing about food is one of my all-time favorite things. And so Kentucky food, if I could get cornbread on the page anyway, it's really a win for me. It's a win.
I love that. And you and I share that in common. My mother was the youngest girl of 9 children. And so same, like I have a mess of cousins, but they're like, my oldest cousin is probably 74.
Wow.
Yeah. So like it's weird to say we're part of the same generation when you think about generations in that way. We're had completely different life experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
Okay, so Charles, Irene, talk to us a little bit about how this project came to be and how you both worked to put it together. I watched a little bit of that from the cheap seats and the technology involved, but share a little bit with the audience on that process.
Irene, why don't you start?
Okay, sure. So fortunately, Charles and I have this working relationship established already because this was a big undertaking and kind of difficult to divvy up. You know, it was kind of impossible to divvy up. We both had to know as much about the story as the other did. So we tackled it together. We kind of took turns on different parts of the story. We started out by, looking at the voices that we wanted to include. And I just want to mention this because it seems to be a theme tonight about strong women. It was so important to me and Charles to bring in the women whose voices were largely not heard. There's not a lot of research available on the women who came over on the Clotilda. Most of the 99% of it is from the male voices. So that, anytime there's gaps in the research, that gives historical fiction writers an entry point. And so it was really important to us, just like Colby and Ellen, creating these strong women. And even though these are women who had been captured and enslaved, to give them agency. And so those were really important things to us, just as an aside to how we worked together. But it took a lot of collaboration on so many levels to bring this story to complete it. I don't know, Charles, you probably have something more concrete to add.
Well, I'm glad this was our third book together and not our first.
Mm-hmm.
Because it took a lot of teamwork, a lot of kind of putting and this is how I try to operate in my life, but it took a lot of just putting ego aside and best idea. And this is my motto: best idea wins. So one of the things that helped us was divvying up who's writing what, and the character. There were so many great characters that we couldn't fit. So many real life people we couldn't fit in the story. So us going back and forth on that took a great deal of time. Thank goodness for Google Docs, because Google Docs, you can work inside an active document independently or together in real time. So there was nothing like me waking up early in the morning and seeing new poems from Irene Latham, and then commenting on them, and then us going back and forth, and then sometimes Irene. The way our writing works is we're different. On the surface, we have a lot of differences, but we have a lot of things in common. But one difference is I like staying up late at night to write. I like the quiet better, and Irene's an early riser. So sometimes I did wake up early, but most of the times I would write when I wasn't working. I'd write through the night, and I found that helpful to me with the story. And then I'd go to bed and I'd wake up later on. There'd be all these poems from Irene and comments on my poems and back and forth. So Google Doc was a big help to us. And so that's kind of how we did it. It took, I think Stacey gave us an 7-month deadline for the first draft. And I'm sure all the writers out there will understand this. Stacey's first draft was our fourth full draft of the story, spaced out over 8 months' time, and all that was thanks to Google Doc. Irene and I we speak on the phone a lot more than we used to, but I can't imagine this happening in the 80s. I'll just put you like that. Us writing this, or the 90s. It would have been really difficult. I don't know how we would have pulled it off.
Would have taken a lot longer.
Yes, it would have.
Yeah.
And at the time I wrote a good chunk of that when I used to live in New York City. Now I live outside of Atlanta, Georgia. So even geographically, it would have been difficult to try to meet up. So,
Can I ask
yeah.
a question that I'm dying to know? Because I've just been reading your gorgeous book for several days, and it's so amazing how these, what are there, 12, 14 characters? How many voices do you use? 14? Okay, so that each one of the 14 characters has such a specific voice, which I think is really hard to do when you're, using multiple POVs. Did you, this is my question, and while I was reading it, did you split up the characters between you? Like, did one person take a character, or were they really created together?
Initially, we split them up just to get first draft stuff on the page. And then that's when the work started. Was, the revision process was pretty intense with both of us working.
Because it's interesting that they're all so different, but also the book works as a whole. And so it feels like it was written by one team or one person, but very different voices. So that's really well done. I'm amazed that you were able to.
Oh, thank you. Well, this is, and I, if I may speak for Irene, we're both poetry fanatics. Mm-hmm. So we've been reading poets, especially poetry for young people, for many years. And that's been, I think both of us, that's been an obsession. Mm-hmm. So we were able to look at the different poetry forms that we realized we would have to have different poetry forms for each of the 14 characters. So there were times where we would go, what this reads like? This, the way this character is with fractured thoughts, and seems like E.E. Cummings. Mm-hmm. And I said, what happens if you take E.E. Cummings and Arnold Adolph and you sit them down for supper? What poetry forms would come out of that? And that's how we built that's how a lot of the poetry forms, Colby, were created. Where it was created in that way. We would look at, let's say, the Clotilda, and Irene and I would go, well, what do you do when you think of a ship? You think of waves. All right, so waves, couplets. Mm-hmm. Long waves, long couplets. So the Clotilda will be written in long couplets. It's really it was us just chopping it up over emails or on the phone, going, let's do it that way. And that's how the book came together with the different characters.
I just want to give a shout out to Caitlin Tutterow, who's my associate editor, because I am a Luddite, and I will stay a Luddite for the rest of my life. And I would literally, when they would send me their draft, I'm like, oh, they sent me another Google Doc. I don't know what to do with this. And I know that's how you guys needed to do it, and I love it. But when it came to me, it's like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with this. I needed a word. We needed a word right now.
Right.
I know.
Word document. Where's a Word
We're
document?
like, we can't do Word documents. It's impossible.
Yeah, we tried.
Yeah.
Well, Stacey, we tried. We were like, nah, this
to the rescue every single time.
Oh, that's funny.
I want to get just to move a little bit into hearing some of these great novels that we have been talking about. And I'm going to start with Ellen, and I'm going to sort of collapse a couple of things because I wanted to read the first line of each of your books, which I will do. But then I want to sort of transition into you reading a favorite part of the book that you've written. So Ellen, the first line of your book is, will Mom and Mama ever see me as more than a little kid? And I kind of tell you why I love that, because it's just so immediately super relatable. And right away, you know who that kid is and you know who this book is for. First lines, as we all know, the audience, I think, is mostly aspiring writers. And it's just so important to get that right first line. And I think going relatable is always a good first step. So I'm going to ask you to read your favorite portion of Reckless Glorious Girl.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for highlighting that line. I'm going to read a couple from the beginning and then one from the middle. Beatrice Miller's burning questions. Will Mom and Mama ever see me as more than a little kid? Will they ever trust me, recognize my growing, see my evolution, witness my expansion? I've been studying other words for mature in our big old thesaurus, and they include evolve, develop, blossom, ripen, arrive. So my question is, will those words ever happen to me? How can I celebrate all the parts of me? Comic book nerd, garden and movie lover, bike rider, swim teamer, nacho eater, mama and mom hugger, late night couch cuddler. Should I shine a light on all the parts of me that no one can see? Nervous, anxious, embarrassed, awkward. Maybe if I could share those feelings, then people would see more of the real me. And then will Mariella, Stacey, Ann, and I ever be officially cool? Not outskirts, outside, sideline cool, but ruling the school. Making all the jokes, getting all the laughs, full lunch table friends finding us after the lunch bell rings. You know, that kind of cool. The kind that's smooth, enters the room before you do. Anyway, I've got about 1 trillion more, but you have to start somewhere.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Beatrice.
That's so good. That's
Beatrice,
so good.
maybe my parents could have chosen a name not like a granny. Less grandma, more teenage. Less arthritic, more athletic. Less geriatric, more youngish. Less old folks home, more spring break. Less ancient, more modern. You get the idea. The fact that it really is my mama's name doesn't make it any better. Fact is, it makes it worse. Because I love my mama more than the ocean or French toast or sleeping in or bacon. And when I don't spend all my time hating it, my name becomes a beacon, some light to hang on to when it's too dark to see myself. And I'll close this with this small one that I have not ever read out loud, Irene. So thank you for saying it. It's called Searching for Me, or what it means to be myself, to land. Today, I miss my dad and the way it could have been. I miss a past I never even knew existed, wondering when my life will feel normal. Oh, time, oh, moon that keeps stretching, oh, sky and pain, oh, mood and disaster, oh, wishing you alive. Oh, breath and time, oh, ache of muscle, oh, the way you love, oh, goodbye. Oh, sunlight and plants and oxygen, oh, swing set on a night of sunsets and planets. Oh, planet of my lungs and heart, oh, blanket of blessings and maple trees and magnolia and black oak and all the ways to say I'm needy and I'm needing and I need you and I'm lost and there's more world than you can even imagine and it's all there waiting for me to figure it out. Thank you.
Love it.
Wow, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Colby,
I was just hoping you wouldn't ask me to go next because those were so good.
You're all good. I have to say, your first line, it just stopped me for a minute. Where Ellen's first line I found super relatable and engaging. Your first line, it's sort of a powerful. That's another great way to enter a novel, particularly a novel in verse. And it's grief consumes like a brush fire. Like, you just feel that in a very soulful way. It sets the tone in a nice way. So I'm going to ask you to read your favorite part of your book.
So I was thinking about that first line and how grief plays a role in the book, and it really plays a role in various different ways. One is I wrote the book because of my grief for my grandmother and her passing. She had struggled with Alzheimer's, and I was really trying to capture her stories and, keep them for our family. And, but also every single character in the book is dealing with grief, and they're war-torn stories, and they've left their families and lost people, and they're starting another life in a country that doesn't understand them. And one of the really hard parts about this book is, and for my grandmother throughout her life, was that her parents were trying to keep the traditions that they held so close to themselves from their past lives, and they were trying to carry them on in America. And so one of the turning wheels of the plot in this story is that her parents really felt like she needed an arranged marriage within their Greek community. And that has always been really, when she would tell these stories, it was terrifying to me that someone would choose, someone that you wouldn't choose your husband based on love. And, she had this quote that was like, she was 16 and they attached her to someone who was 40 and a successful businessman in his 40s. And her quote that she would always tell me was, if he comes in the front door, I'm going out the back. And she was so clear that this was not going to be her life. And so I want to read 3 poems that really show her. This is like their first meeting. It's her and this older man, Demetrius, and you can see her parents like wanting them to be in a relationship, and you can feel that she is not going to let this happen. So I'm going to read from my actual book because I still like to hold it in my hand. So it starts with, Mother slices the cake. Father pours sour cherry liqueur into small glasses. Mary made this herself, he says, and pats my arm with pride. Demetrius takes a sip and smiles politely. They leave us alone in the parlor. Golden icons of Mary and baby Jesus look down at me from high on the shelves. Demetrius scoots next to me. The side of his body is touching mine. You are a beautiful young girl, he says, as he takes a lock of my hair and twists it around his finger. His breath smells like death and onions. Who is this wicked old man? He wants a child. I want to grow the claws and wings of a gorgon, feed his eyes to the hungry creatures that live in the depths of the swamp, turn him into stone. When I was 12, my mother and I embroidered a soft white gown, 2 sheets and 2 pillowcases, every single piece decorated with pink and yellow flowers. We folded them carefully into my cedar dowry chest. I imagined with each stitch how excited I would be to wear a nightgown in front of a man for the first time. Now I know I have sewn the bed that I must lie in. These linens will be my prison.
Ooh. Gave me goosebumps.
I know it's not the best part of the story, but it resolves it.
Right.
Well, your voice really draws us in too. Like you read that quite well. Again, the soulfulness was just really evident in that section. African Town, the first line of African Town. I think it's been the first line since acquisition. And the feeling I had when I read that first line and when I read it today, putting the questions together, is just the same. Like there's a immediate sense of reverence. And I always imagine it being said in a really hushed voice. Be still, my children.
Oh.
Yeah, Kosala was a storyteller. So in the story, he's gathered the children around to tell the story of their ancestors. Who are you reading, Charles? Are you reading Kosala?
I was gonna read. I was gonna read Gumpa.
Oh yeah, go whatever.
I was gonna. I could read. I could read the. Would you like me to read that poem, Stacey? The to be still my children.
The assignment was for you to read your favorite, so you
okay.
read what you want to read.
Okay.
I read my favorite already.
Okay, sounds good. Give me 1 second, because in my excitement to join this chat, I didn't charge up my laptop. So let me just.
Want me to go ahead and go, Charles?
There we go. No, I got it. Okay. So I wanted to read something that had a little bit of levity in such a heavy story. So this is Gumpa with some Clotilda African, with some of the other Clotilda Africans thinking about saving money to try to get back to Africa. And so this poem is called "The Plan to Purchase Passage." "We must deny ourselves everything we need," I announce. "Work more hours at the mill, take more trips to Mobile to sell our produce." Cupidly looks to the women. "If this is going to work, then you women must resist purchasing fine fabrics, no matter how it catches your eye." Kianko rolls her eyes, then points a finger at all us men. "The same rules go for you all as well." I swallow and stare down at my shiny new shoes. I do love wearing nice footwear. It is my weakness. It will be difficult to abstain from this, but I am determined. The women link arms, and I suppress a grin as Cupidly throws his hands up in surrender. "Sorry," he says. I lean over and whisper into Kosala's ear. "If only James were here. These women are too strong for us." He flashes a grin. "That is the truest thing I have heard all day. Though if James were here, we would still be no match for them." The room relaxes into laughter as we enjoy a brief respite from our longing. So I love how the women, as the fellas, talking all this. "Well, you need to do this," and the women are like, uh-huh. Same rules apply, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, okay."
Love it.
So, yes, so that'd be mine. Irene?
I'd like to read the Clotilda, and as Charles said earlier in the program, the Clotilda was able to give kind of the voice of the world, and it's this wise voice, and it is written in couplets. And so at this point, the Clotilda has been loaded with the 110 Africans, and we're on day 1, heading back to the United States. Day 1. I cheer on those 2 vessels, hoping they'll catch me and set the Africans free. Arrest all these white men and capture Glele and Akota too. But it doesn't happen. My burden is that once my riggings are set and someone mans this wheel and spindle of mine, I fly. I leave those boats behind and out of ship's range in 4 hours. I've always thought I could handle anything until I hear the wails of Africans trapped below decks, their souls being crushed by loneliness, fear, and abuse. Their screams threaten to tear me apart, but their long stretches of silence are even worse. I have the open sea to ride upon, but what must it be like for them? I do what I can to make it a smooth crossing. The captain and crew may not care about them, but I do. With each surge across the waves, I fight to keep us all safe and strong. If I'd been built with a heart, it would be broken.
I mean, wonderful readings, all of you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So part of me being a Luddite, I just found the comments. So Erica did walk us through this, but for some reason, I thought they would just pop up. I didn't have to click comments. But I will say there's not really any questions. There's really just a lot of praise. I hope you're able to kind of sort through the inspiration that you are providing for people in the audience. It's really astounding to see. And I think I'll end it with one last question. Erica, do I have time for one last question or no?
There's a couple in there, but there's one in particular that I think might be really helpful for people to.
Yeah. Which one is it?
To see. They want to know, were you all established poets before seeking publication for your books in verse?
Yes.
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 So I had published, this is my first book, and I have a first book of poetry that was a finalist for 20 book prizes and never taken. And it also lived very deeply in my heart. But there was something about finding novels in verse that someone said this, and I was just reading this, and it might have, I can't remember who it was, but someone said when they start, it was Margarita Engel, actually, when she returned back to writing in a novel in verse again after not writing one, she said it was like coming home. Mm-hmm. And I really felt so deeply that once I started writing in this form, it felt very different to me. And I'm so grateful for the form, for a place to live. But I think that the background of poetry really helps. It helps.
And Stacey, there was one. Oh, Ellen, do you want to add something?
No, well, I was just going to say that I had a couple of collections of poetry, but it's similar to what Colby said. I co-wrote a YA with Renee Watson, who is amazing, and would learn sort of the process of writing, a young adult book. But so the idea that a novel in verse, I remember reading The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I was like, I think I could see the structure. I had read a couple of novels in verse a long time ago, but I did not. I think once I started to think about the plot and how the poems speak to each other, I think that is what changed for me. I have other collections of poetry that feel like the poems are in conversation, but they're not following a plot line. So when I started to figure out how do some poems land on their own, how do they stand alone, or how do some poems feel like scenes, I think that's where I started. I had a lot of, I'm loving the process of it, because it's very different than a collection of poetry. For me, it is. So I think that's where it changed a little bit for me.
Oh my God, I echo everything that you just said so much.
Yeah. And Stacey, there's a question in there for you. I mean, not really, but maybe for you, about concern about hearing that editors don't want to acquire novels in verse.
Well, I will tell you, I've acquired 4 in the last year. And looking at my colleagues across Penguin, Random House, and more wider in the industry, I think that there is, I don't want to use the word trend, but there is a lot of new opportunities for novels in verse. I think there had been sort of a stigma attached to novels in verse that they were hard to sell, right? That you're really more courting the school and library market, and that there is not going to be a really robust trade market for a novel in verse. And that has clearly changed in the last, I would say, 5 years. I think Elizabeth Acevedo has a lot to do with that, for sure. And the forum is, as Charles was saying earlier, it just welcomes a lot of different kinds of readers and allows a lot of different kinds of stories to be told. And I think in editors that are really looking for innovation, that a lot of that is coming through in novels in verse.
Mm-hmm. I'll leave you to wrap it up.
Oh, well, I just had the one question, because just being cognizant of who is in the audience. I just wanted to ask if each of our guests here would leave us with one word of advice for aspiring writers who want to be where you're sitting.
I would say focus on the projects that light you up. If it lights your world, then it's a lot more likely to light up Stacey Barney than it is, just stick with the things that mean the most to you.
I would say write the books that you need personally, that you can't find on the shelf, and that would help you exist in the world. And there is probably going to be another person in the world who needs them too.
Yeah, I would say check plus on both of those, and find your community and your people who want to be rising up with you and who hold you accountable and who say, let's write together and let's turn this in together. And hey, did you write today? Just one more shout out to Renee Watson on that one, because just having people and your crew and your community be there for you, I think that's my best advice. I think
I would say stay the course. Don't let any outside voices, or a lot of people didn't know that I was a poet who wrote for young people for years. That was like my delicious secret, because I was concerned that if I said something, the negativity would come and it would veer me off course. So I'd just say stay the course. Butt in chair, Bic, Jane Yolen, always. And read a lot. And just speaking of Elizabeth Azevedo, this will be my next one I'm going to read, is Clap When You Land.
So good.
So, keep reading, everybody. The only way to be a better writer is to read a lot.
And then I'll add, don't be afraid to take chances with your craft. That's what's going to be exciting. Well, everyone, this has been a really fun hour plus talking to such talented, lovely people. I don't know, I'm going to do the rest of my night now. But thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a really great night. And I hope, poetry finds you.
Maybe you'll stay all night, Stacey. If you just stay, let's just have a poetry sleepover. Thank you all. It was so moving, and I was like, is there going to be enough time to read parts of the books? But I am so grateful to you, Stacey. It's like, you knew that's exactly what we needed. I'm like, we should just have a reading. Like, it was so moving to hear all of your voices and to hear all of you read from your books. I just want you to know what it was like to all of us who are listening. I think it has filled me up to the very, very top. So thank you for that. And thank you, Stacey. And I'll just remind everybody that, because I forgot to say it in the beginning, that our spotlighted indie bookstore is Little Shop of Stories in Decatur, Georgia. And they're amazing. It's the most magical place. I've been putting their link in the chat multiple times. If you are moved to purchase books, I hope you will purchase it from Little Shop of Stories. And I thank them for helping us to spread the word about this event tonight. Also, if you have not, but you would like to, I encourage you to subscribe and like this video below by just clicking on that little thumbs up. How could you not like it? So likable. And we will be in touch via our Small Live newsletter about our next event. If you don't already subscribe to the newsletter, you can just go to the Small Live website and you can do that there. So everybody, thank you so much. And if you're readers, keep reading. And if you're writers, keep writing. And we thank you for spending the night with us. So good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.